What's going on? Jake here with Uncommon EDC, and today we're going to be taking a sneak peek at the Mallery design Spectra. Now I say sneak peek because this is a prototype. However, this knife is available now for pre-order over on his website for $175, and I'll make sure to leave a link to that pre-order down in the description of the video. This pre-order is going to be limited to 200 pieces, and I believe we're about 3/4 of the way through it already at this point. So if you do want to get in on this one, I would recommend doing so sooner rather than later. Once that pre-order has been fulfilled, we're looking at about a 3-month production window, so relatively quick turnaround time on these. Now, keep in mind that this is a prototype, so there are going to be some minor tweaks between this version and the final version that goes into production, and we'll talk about what those tweaks are. Nothing crazy. It's for the most part what you see is what you're going to get, but there will be some minor tweaks that we'll talk about later in the video. Now, as far as the design itself goes, medium-sized knife, and for those that watch my channel, you know that's my preference. This is right at the top end of that zone, about 7.6 inches in overall length. I definitely prefer a medium-sized knife over those kind of large, bulkier knives that some people prefer, and so this one's right in my wheelhouse. A lot of different deployment methods too. So we have that frame lock, plenty of access to there. You get a nice smooth action, it drops, and then you can shake it the rest of the way. And then you have this elongated thumb hole, which gives you plenty of access if you do want to flick that open with your thumb or even slow roll it, but it gives you perfect access for that middle finger flick, and you can really put your middle finger anywhere within this hole, flick out, and it's gonna come springing out of there. Really snappy, smooth action. And then of course the front flipper. And again, if you watch my channel a lot, you know that they're not my favorite, and a lot of that's due to the aesthetic. Both flippers with their beaks sticking out the back end, or front flippers with the over dramatic kind of triangles at the top, they're just a little bit of an eyesore. Sometimes they even interfere with ergonomics, and so not a huge fan of it. But I think this is how front flippers should be done. It's subtle, it's unobstructive, and the design of the knife looks pretty natural. It doesn't look like it was designed around that front flipper, but it's still very easy to actuate, and the action on that front flipper is just as good as the thumb hole. Super smooth and snappy, so really satisfying. A lot of fun to fidget with this knife. You have all of those different deployment methods, and all of them work equally well, so it's really going to come down to preference. I'm a middle finger Milton, but if you're a front flipper Freddy and you prefer that deployment method, it works just as well. So it's kind of choose your own adventure in that regard. I find myself pretty much exclusively middle finger flipping it, but again, that's just because that's my preference. Now, back to that sizing, we get about 4¼ inches in the handle. Plain Jane titanium on the handle, which makes a great canvas if you want to do some anodization on here or send it off for an engraving. Really nice candidate for that because you have that blank canvas, but the plain Jane titanium also looks great on its own. 4¼ inches allows me to get a full 4-finger grip on here, wear a size large glove. I know Tim over at Tim's School of Fish said it was a little bit smaller for his hands. He has wider hands than I do, and so his pinky's kind of half on, half off on the back. But for my hands, I'm able to get that perfect 4-finger grip on there. Another thing he mentioned is not really being able to creep up onto this platform near the pivot, and for me that's actually really comfortable because I'm able to pull back. I'm not too worried about creeping up onto that edge. There's some nice jimping that is added for that front flipper that allows me to really lock into that grip, so I really enjoy this grip quite a bit, and I'll kind of see myself gravitating back and forth between the two depending on what type of cut. He said he designed this as sort of a folding steak knife, and so if you're using it as a steak knife, I'd probably sit a little bit further back so my knuckles aren't in the way, but you can see that blade shape. That drop point style blade has a nice forward belly, so if you're kind of slanted downwards a little bit, that's the point that's going to be making contact with that plate, and you can see this would work really well in that regard if you wanted to use it for its intended use case there. Now 3.4 inches on the blade and 3¼ inches or so of cutting edge. Now that is one of the changes we're going to see. We have a satin finish on this prototype. The final version is going to be a stonewash finish. Now 9 times out of 10 I would choose stonewash over satin finish, so that's a really welcome change for me. I know some people prefer satin finish, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what this is going to look like with that stonewash finish. Flat grind on here. You can see we have that elongated thumb hole, which we already talked about in the deployment segment, and then S35VN on the steel. Now fans voted on what steel they wanted to see, and S35VN won out. I think it's a great option. It's tried and true, just classic steel, and it's keeping the price down a little bit too, so that $175 price point makes this one nice and accessible. I think a really good price point for this one. Beautiful knife at that price as well. Now another thing worth mentioning on those titanium handles, the ergos are really solid in both of those grips. One thing that was a little bit surprising to me is how well he was able to hide that pocket clip on the ergos. A lot of times with narrower handles like this, the pocket clip just gets in the way. It creates a warm spot or even a hot spot. You can usually feel it. But this one, even though it's a narrow handle and the pocket clip isn't even centered, it's close to the edge. That's usually a recipe for really being able to feel the pocket clip. For whatever reason, it just disappears behind the knuckles. I don't feel it at all. So really, really well hidden. So really smart design choices in terms of the placement of that pocket clip. Feels really great. Another interesting thing about these titanium handles is there is no milling on the internal. I don't know how well that's going to be able to be visualized, obviously, but no milling on the internal portion of these handles, but the knife is still really lightweight. I weighed it in at 2.93 ounces, so great weight to length ratio there, and feels really well balanced, great in the hand, and at that lightweight weight, you're not really going to notice in your pocket either, so did a really good job of that. A big part of that is you can see we have a somewhat narrow handle, relatively narrow blade stock, and just kept super slim and compact, and so that was allowing him to keep that weight down a little bit, even though we have a longer knife. Now back to that pocket clip, worth mentioning, right hand tip up only, and that's not surprising. You can see the Mallery design maker's mark on that pocket clip, but that's not surprising with a frame lock. Frame locks aren't notoriously ambidextrous, and so a lot of times you'll see knife companies introduce a left-hand version of the frame lock with a left-hand pocket clip and a left-hand lock on there. Not sure if that's going to be in the cards for this one. I haven't heard any whispers of that, so unfortunately lefties may be out of luck there, but does have that really, really nice milled titanium pocket clip with his maker's mark there. No place for a lanyard hole. One other interesting thing that we can take a look at is that backspacer. It has a sort of unusual feature where the end isn't flush with the end of the knife, and so I thought that was quite unusual until you close this knife up. So we have that big old 3.4-inch drop point style blade, and the only reason we're able to have that is because it uses all of that real estate. So with this backspacer not being flush with the handle, he was able to eke out another tenth or couple hundredths of an inch there, and so be able to get that blade just a little bit longer without worrying about it hitting on that backspacer, which I think is a really cool feature. Overall, aesthetically, I think this is a beautiful looking knife. I always think he has a nice flow to his knives. Like if you ever seen one of those car commercials with the wind machines blowing over showing the aerodynamics of the car, I always imagine his designs kind of in one of those machines and him designing with that in mind. Another knife of his that I really enjoyed was the CJRB Centros, and here you can see very, very similar profile in terms of blade shape, handle shape, everything. The Centros is a little bit bigger, but you can see a lot of the same design elements there. We obviously have different deployment methods. We have a frame lock instead of a liner lock, but very, very similar designs, and always had the same thought about this one is it just has a very clean flow to the design, and you can see his maker's mark on the back side of the blade here. One thing that I'm not sure of is going to be the markings, and so right now we have a very sterile design without a lot of markings. The steel's not marked on their model or anything like that, and so really enjoy that aspect of it. We do have his maker's mark on the pocket clip, but nowhere else. Will be interesting to see if that gets introduced into the final design. Now, last thing I wanted to talk about were those minor tweaks and changes. First one I may have already mentioned is that blade. I don't think I did actually. So we have a satin blade here. It's going to be a stonewash finish, which I think I did actually mention that. So I do prefer a stonewash finish, so nice change. The other two though I definitely haven't mentioned. Captive pivot instead of this free spinning pivot. No idea if that's going to mean that we're going to get tooled on both sides or a single side. That would be another place where you might see his maker's mark if he goes tooled on one side and we have a flat surface for a maker's mark. Would be an interesting spot for it as well. And then the last really, really minor tweak is something I would have never noticed, but he pointed out, is that in the finger groove right here, these don't line up exactly, and so there's going to be a slight change to the final file to make sure that those line up, but otherwise everything else should be the same as what you see here. Overall, really, really cool design. I would definitely be picking up this pre-order if it were not tax season. That being said, hopefully I will be able to get this one sometime in the future, whether that's on the secondary or for future releases. But really, really cool design. Really enjoying this one. Would love to hear your thoughts on it down in the comments below. And if you do want to get in that pre-order, again, I'll make sure to leave it in the description, a link to where you can find that. Not affiliated with Dylan Mallery in any way, but he did provide this to the Apex Pass Around group for us to check out. So really grateful for him sending it over for us to take a look at. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, checking out some other content. And as always, I hope you have a great one. Take care.